And I would like to think that some version of that is going to continue going forward.
I mean, any cinema is a micro cinema when it's at 25% capacity, pretty much.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true. This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Russ Fischer, the editorial director of the Box Office Studios, and I'm joined by Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, and Rebecca Pahle, the deputy editor of Box Office Pro. And this week we have a few different things to talk about. We have box office results, including the continued upward performance of Demon Slayer, Marvel in sort of a, hey, the movies are great, let's go back to the movies announcement, also revealed some details about upcoming titles, and we have a couple of other points to discuss. And that's all before we feature a panel of exhibitor execs talking about private rentals. So let's do the news. Daniel, Demon Slayer continues to slay. Did I do that right?
Yeah, I think that qualifies as a pun. Good job.
Okay.
We can check that off the list.
Excellent. Okay, cool.
Well, I don't know if we can even say that quite well. It did as we expected it to do. So Sean Robbins on this podcast, we'd asked him, hey, what are your expectations as our chief analyst here looking at the box office of a title like Demon Slayer in its second weekend? Sean brought up the example of Dragon Ball Super Broly, which is the last anime title to have opened at around 20 million here in North America. And he warned, hey, these movies are very front-loaded. This might happen to Demon Slayer, and that's precisely what happened. We saw a 70% plus drop for Demon Slayer in its sophomore frame, coming in at 6.4 million in its second weekend. But that was enough to lead the box office, which is an important detail looking at the other films that are on the market and seeing that this is coming from a very small distributor like Funimation. Demon Slayer topping the box office, as I mentioned, that 6.4 million take, followed in second place Mortal Kombat with 6.2 million. Of course, Demon Slayer is only available in theaters right now. The folks that didn't watch Mortal Kombat on opening weekend talked about it with their friends. Well, looks like some of them decided to watch it at home. Another big 70% plus drop for a Warner Brothers title here in the box office. I think that we can confidently say at this point, with the exception of family titles, this is looking like a trend now, these big drops in sophomore frames for films that go day and date from studios.
Daniel, I actually had the opportunity to speak to Mitchell Berger, who's the Senior Vice President of Global Commerce at Funimation. If you go to boxofficepro.com, you can see that piece. We did talk about Funimation's philosophy towards theatrical distribution. As you mentioned, they did go exclusively to theaters first, and it certainly is something that Funimation, as a distributor, is quite passionate about. So it's an interesting interview. You can go to boxofficepro.com now to check that out.
Talking about that pattern of drop-off, especially with respect to debuts from studios. One of the next big movies we're looking at this year is Marvel's Black Widow, which is set to open on July 9. Black Widow was, of course, originally slated to open just after the pandemic hit in 2020. It was delayed a couple of times. Hopefully now this July date seems set. It seems like it's fully in place. And while Marvel is doing a day-and-date release, it is one of the films that you're going to have to pay extra to see on Disney+, which is something that might hopefully help the theatrical experience a little bit. And it will also benefit from debuting at a point when hopefully a much larger percentage of the population is vaccinated, local economies are reopened, and people are ready to go out to the movies a little bit more even than they are now. So kind of to celebrate that, today Marvel released a big video that basically reminded, hey, theaters are really nice. The theatrical experience is great. It's exactly the sort of thing some people were noting we didn't see much of during the Oscars from the telecast. And one has to wonder if Marvel maybe originally meant to have this air during the Oscars cast.
You can definitely feel behind the scenes they were stepping carefully with that video. Russ, as you mentioned, the first half of it before they got into previewing their upcoming slate, which is a ton of films in a relatively short period of time. It did emphasize the way that the Marvel movies really work. The act of going to the movie theaters is a wonderful experience. When they did get to the point of saying, hey, these are the movies that are coming out, these are their dates, along with some new titles. For example, Black Panther 2 is now Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Captain Marvel 2 is now The Marvels. None of those dates made any mention of, is this going to be theatrical? Is this going to be day and date? Is this maybe going to be pushed to Disney Plus? They were I felt conscious of not specifying, which makes sense because I imagine with how everything's so in flux all the time now, they haven't fully decided. But it was a notable, playing of the cards carefully to me.
It is interesting that this also showed off the first footage from Eternals, which is directed by Chloe Zhao, who just won Best Director and whose movie Nomadland just won Best Picture at the Oscars. And there's no mention of those awards wins in this video, which seems kind of notable to me. But maybe...
Even though Nomadland was a Searchlight release and thus owned by Disney.
Yeah, you would think that maybe with Marvel, the IP is everything. And the fact that it is directed by somebody like Chloe Zhao is great, but it doesn't matter when Marvel is advertising to their audience. They're like, no, we don't even need to point this out. Information is out there if you want it, but it's not part of our pitch.
That's not why anyone's seeing it.
Exactly. They're seeing it for Kumail Nanjiani being ripped is why people are going to see Eternals. That and Angelina Jolie and everything else. What I will say is that this is the sort of video where 2 years ago, Marvel would have convened a big special event to announce this stuff. They would have done a thing in Hollywood. They would have invited journalists and fans, or they would have done it at Comic-Con or at, one of Disney's confabs, or even at CinemaCon. We might have seen this kind of roll out at CinemaCon, but now it is just a video that they email out to people and they put on social media. And ultimately the thing is, it does the same for them. And so I do kind of wonder if a lot of those big, in-person events might change in the future, because why would they spend that money when they can get their messaging out just as effectively doing what they did this morning?
And promote Disney Plus at the same time if they choose to do so in the future, which they did not for this.
Precisely.
I mean, it's interesting, like you say, Daniel, we've been talking so much over this last year about trying to decipher or intuit which of X, Y, and Z is a pandemic play and which is going to be more permanent. Definitely, we're getting closer, if not close, to the point where we're going to start seeing some answers to those questions, because the industry is slowly but hopefully surely coming out of hibernation. Specifically, I'm thinking of Europe, where, Daniel, we're looking forward to indoor cinemas in the UK opening on May 17th. And now we've had some big and positive news regarding France.
That's right, Rebecca. May 19th, French cinemas are going to be coming back at 35% capacity. It's an important step for one of the most important markets in Europe. And they have a little bit more organized process as opposed to what we have here in the United States, where it's still a guessing game, for example, on when New York City is going to hit 50% admissions capacity. There's a couple of different ideas on when that could happen. France has laid out a consistent schedule on this tiered reopening. You can find that on our website, boxofficepro.com. And related to that, Rebecca, on what is going to be part of moviegoing as we start getting out of the pandemic is the issue of private rentals. As we know, private cinema rentals have been a fantastic lifeline for movie theaters over the past year. And as the box office slowly starts to recover here in North America, a lot of exhibitors are asking themselves, how is this going to continue in my business moving forward? How do we make this a long-standing part of what we offer audiences without it cannibalizing our revenue? An important question that I think every exhibitor is asking themselves right now. We have a fantastic panel that we brought together in one of our Box Office Pro live session webinars with a number of exhibitors and our sponsor partner, GDC. Before we get into that, let's get this sponsor message from GDC in front of you.
Coming soon to a mini theater near you, GDC is excited to introduce the award-winning Espideo Supra 5000 RGB Plus laser phosphor cinema projector. It's so small, so light, and so quiet, it can be installed inside the auditorium with no hush box. Based on proven technologies from Aptronics, Texas Instruments, and GDC Technology, Supra 5000 makes it more affordable for theater owners to build a mini theater, also making it perfect for a private cinema movie theater-like screening at home or even at sea. So what are you waiting for? Get on board with the emerging mini theater market with the Super 5000. Email us-sales@gdc-tech.com or contact your GDC sales representative for further information.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, GDC Technology, for sponsoring this week's episode and our live session on Box Office Barometer. So guys, I wanted to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of explanation on what this Box Office Barometer concept is. In our publication, which is now 101 years old, we had a readers poll where we would ask our exhibitor readers to write in with their votes on their favorite movies, favorite movie stars. We had this for decades. We paused it for whatever reason. I really have no idea why we stopped having an initiative like this. But during the pandemic, I remember sitting down with Rebecca and genuinely wondering what exhibitors were thinking about during these months and what their relations were not only to studios, but to vendors, a very difficult period. So we decided to come out and start this poll once again, Box Office Barometer. We set up a voting system online so exhibitors could come in, register, and send out their picks for the best companies or the companies they thought performed best in 2020. The results were very surprising. For example, we know that Warner Brothers had that very controversial decision to go day and date with their movies on HBO Max. The majority voted for Warner Brothers as the distributor of the year and as the exhibitor relations department of the year. I think, Rebecca, you and I were both a little bit surprised until we stepped back and realized this is the one studio, along with Universal, that has done a really good job at getting big movies into theaters this past year. They found a way to do it. It might not be the ideal way, but they've already committed that it's going to end that day and date experiment after 1 year. So we had that surprising result. I guess less surprisingly, Christopher Nolan's Tenet, a Warner Brothers release, being voted film of the year. Rebecca, what were some of the other categories we had and the winners that came through in those categories?
For Vendor of the Year, we have Vista Group, which, as our exhibitor friends listening to this podcast will know, have their hand in a number of different pies and really operate kind of across the exhibition technology landscape. Specifically for Tech Vendor of the Year, we have Cineonic, which Daniel, you and Russ and I know that they've really done an exceptional job this year at keeping in touch with their customer base, communicating. To that end as well, the F&B Vendor of the Year was voted to be Vistar.
And in the category of Industry Figure of the Year, we had our colleagues at the National Association of Theater Owners for all the work they've done to protect movie theaters during this extremely difficult year. They came in as the recipients of the Box Office Barometer 2020 Industry Figure of the Year, the only poll voted exclusively by exhibitors. So congratulations on the winners for this year. And then the only category that wasn't voted by exhibitors, that was voted on by our editorial staff here at Box Office Pro, was the Cinema Trend of the Year. And Rebecca, you are currently writing a feature article for our next magazine issue on this topic. Could you let us know what that was?
So what we're looking at here are two very interconnected topics, those being micro cinemas and private cinema rentals. This is something that has been around for a while. I think particularly Asia and certain markets of Europe, the private cinema rental concept, and maybe had a smaller mini or micro cinema that you can rent out for a group of, 15, 20 people for a special event. That's something that has already existed. Certainly it's something that's already existed in North America in the sense that, any cinema really has a group sales department where you can rent out the cinema for a birthday party or for a corporate event. When the pandemic hit, that process really got streamlined a lot. You saw private cinema rentals really becoming an essential component of small cinemas to the largest chains being able to stay open, being able to bring customers in. It's really been a lifesaver for a lot of these cinemas. And so we were really excited to speak to Tony Adamson at GDC Technology, and then representatives also from Santikos, Marcus Theaters, Cinépolis USA, and B&B Theatres, both about the success that they've had with private cinema rentals over the last year and change, but also how they expect that trend to to evolve and change in a post-pandemic atmosphere. We can start off here, though, with Tony Adamson of GDC, who really puts this private cinema rental, micro cinema trend in a historic context that I think is really interesting.
We know we all enjoy going to the movies, and we should all see the content on the big screen. But let's take a look at the evolution of the movie theater. And just a real simple overview. Early 20th century was the Grand Movie Palace. In 1963, the multiplex era began with a twin and leading up to 14, 16, 18 plexes. Then in 1995, the megaplex era began with the 24, 30 screen complexes. And now many would say we're kind of in the dine-in era or the entertainment center era. So what's next in the evolution of the movie theater? Well, we feel very strongly that it's the mini theater. The mini theater we see as the future. So one of the things that's kind of driven us to this conclusion is through a lot of research that we've done and a lot of conversations we've had with exhibitors that have mini theaters. But I also found this to be very interesting because we've kind of studied the habits of the Gen X, Gen Z, and the millennials. And back in 2018, I found this quote from Helen Lude. A main takeaway was what gets teenagers to the movie theaters. Being able to see a movie before it's available at home with friends in a cool location. So that kind of says it all, They want to kind of be with their friends. They want to be with their families. They want to text. They want to talk. They want to do this. They want to do that. And in the mini theater in a private, setting, they do that. So what is the delay in this trend in the U.S.? Well, obviously competition from home entertainment, resistance to change. We're in the dine-in era and we're not going to change. So many exhibitors are resistant, but they're just as equal amount that are ready to move on to the next era.
Tony's quote makes me think of two things. One is that, the very power of the private rental and by extension the micro cinema is something that we've been discussing on the podcast throughout its entire life cycle, right? We know that for independent theaters, this is a big deal. We know for any mid-sized theater, it's a huge deal. And the pandemic has created a really interesting evolution in the way all exhibitors approach the private rental. And so, I think this is a really illuminating quote. And I think that it's been really interesting to see how companies like AMC and Cinemark have done really well with private rentals, with their own variety of creating kind of a micro cinema within a much larger corporate structure. And I would like to think that some version of that is going to continue going forward.
I mean, any cinema is a micro cinema when it's at 25% capacity, pretty much.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true.
Next up, we did hear from Robert Lehman, COO at Santikos Entertainment, a chain based out of Texas, one of the first chains to reopen in the United States, and a chain that has had great success with private cinema rentals over the last year.
Back in November, we started getting a lot of requests from our customers about private screenings, and, everybody in the industry started looking at it about the same time. Our friends at Cinemark and Draft House and AMC jumped on it first. We followed suit very quickly in December, and we started in December. We had 658 private screening rentals that month. We had 54 on Christmas Day alone, and I'd say 50 of the 54 were for Wonder Woman. So it really took off there. We had a Christmas classic, so we played Elf, National Lampoon's Vacation, and it like I said, we did 3 different price structures. We did a $75 rental, we did a $135 rental, and then Wonder Woman we did $175. And we were blown away by the number of people that wanted private rentals. We had 194 alone for Wonder Woman, and that was for the month of December. So in 6 days, 194 private showings. So, we've adapted over the last 3-4 months. January, we had it at 7 theaters. We dropped down to our 4 theaters, our big ones, basically twice a day. every day, two auditoriums every day. And, we did another 316 there. And, a lot of the Christmas movies were already gone by then. And, February, we kept moving and changing the way we were doing, adapting like everybody does, for the last year. Crisis management, we've all done very well with that. And, so right now, in February, we introduced it to hook up your PlayStation 4 or 5, Xbox. And last month in March, we had 43 private rentals, on just that alone.
Listening to Robert's quote, the one thing that, you kind of said a second ago that at 25%, every cinema is a micro cinema, but also, seeing that, the Draft House was one of the chains that went towards the private rentals really early in the pandemic. The Draft House opening in Los Angeles was a big deal at the end of 2019. And that theater also is kind of a micro cinema by design, where I think the largest house seats like 60 people because of their downtown location, which had a lot of physical constraints. And they have some much smaller rooms there. And, we're too late to ask the question now about whether or not we're going to see a difference in the way cinemas are built going forwards. But some things like seeing the LA experience with the Draft House makes me wonder if we might even see some smaller cinemas by design.
And of course, the auditorium is only part of the equation, right? The physical space is important, but you also have to make sure that the customer journey, including the ticket buying experience, is streamlined and easy. And it's something, Rebecca, that we've been covering here a lot, really, in the last 5 to 10 years, in just how e-commerce has revolutionized not only audience analytics, but also the experience of buying a ticket, of finding a showtime. Really, the internet and e-commerce has made that a very, very different system. And ever since I started covering exhibition in this job in 2013, one of my contacts in the industry that's really helped me understand the role of group sales and private rentals has been the VP of sales at Marcus Theatres, Clint Wisielowski, who I've known for many years now, someone that I've learned a lot from. And it was great having him on this panel. I asked him about that, how the group sales dynamic has changed. This is something that he has looked over at a top circuit like Marcus for a number of years now. And he mentioned that a dedicated online ticketing portal really made a difference for Marcus Theatres during the pandemic in really pushing a lot of these private rentals.
And it's made all the difference, right? So as much as I love my crew and our group sales department, once we automated this system and allowed people to come in through what we're calling our microsite, it dramatically changed the numbers for us. It again allowed us to, with greatly depleted staff based on, all the furloughs we had, to monetize these private rentals. It really did make a huge difference. We set it up such that the showtimes appear on both our traditional website and our microsite. We have triggers involved. So we limit it by seat count, COVID seat count in the auditorium, and times of day. So it's also controlled in the field. We set up attributes and price cards based on the feature. So we run from $99 for catalog titles through $149 for seasoned first run and $175 for the first run titles that come out. All of those are clearly marked on the microsite. When you get to our microsite, you're no longer on our website. You're involved in this little microcosm of your ability to manage it yourself. That allowing that guest to make that purchase from beginning to end with no interaction from me, it makes it much faster, much cleaner, and much easier for us to execute.
And that was Clint Wisielowski, the VP of Sales at Marcus Theatres. Some very interesting insights there as it relates to making it easy for the customer to do this online. I don't know about you guys, but before the pandemic, I didn't know too many people that would go out and rent their own cinema. It was something that maybe a corporate department at a big company would do. Now it's something that families are doing. Now it's something that the regular consumer has access to. Making that easy, making it in a process that's not intimidating has been crucial for movie theaters during this time. And related to that, we were able to get additional insight from Annalise Holyoke, the National Director of Marketing and Communications at Cinépolis USA, who came in and really went into detail on what about these private rentals she expects to work and what won't work after the COVID crisis.
I don't think the concept is going away anytime soon, but for us, it's really shifted, away from those primetime hours. Prior to COVID, our company was doing thousands of private events every year and primarily corporate, but I think we always all joked that one of the most time consuming events were those like kids' birthday parties that were really not spending any money. And our, highly paid sales team was focusing way too much attention on that. And I think this has been a game changer for us now that we've gotten it online, to still have that Saturday morning, 11 a.m. spot that if you want to have your kid's birthday party, you can book it online yourself. And quite frankly, we're just not going to help you, coordinate clowns and all these other things that they want to do. If you want to go that route, you'll have to, go have a higher food and beverage minimum and book with our team. But in general, the hardest part for us now is that with capacity going up to 50% in California, it doesn't really make sense for us to continue offering those primetime slots. But the demand is there and people are kind of frustrated that they can't get a theater for 4 people or even 20 people when now that capacity is up to 50%, it really makes more sense for us to just have it as a regular show.
I have to say, listening to Annalisa's quote, it's remarkable to me that any theater would ever have helped me coordinate a clown.
That was an option this whole time, Russ.
I didn't know that. And now you're telling me that's gone. A thing I didn't even know was available is now gone. And it's just a little bit rude to put it across that way. But I will say it's remarkable to me that any company like this, for an exhibitor whose, entire structure is dedicated towards showing movies and selling concessions, that there would be any extra things like, oh, we're going to help you do more to coordinate your birthday party is kind of astonishing and makes sense to me on every level that they would say, you know what, we can just do the simple structure of this through a website now, and we're going to let our guests figure out all the rest of it because, yeah, obviously that's the way that you should do that.
It's not a good use of our time. I mean, that said, definitely since it's become streamlined and easy to do, disclosure, I have not done a private cinema rental. I've looked it up, but I think by the time it got to the point where cinemas were open in New York, it was too expensive. The theaters were there, the films were there, but it had reached a point where the financial viability of the price point at which it makes sense for the theaters to do this was just too high. And, a part of that is the market that I'm based in, New York, compared to other cities. The movie tickets aren't cheap compared to the national average. But I think maybe in that experience, what we're seeing is a glimpse into maybe what private cinema rentals will be like in the future. Maybe they'll be a little bit more boutique, a little bit special, a little bit certainly pricier. A cinema is not going to want to rent out a cinema to 20 people when they can just have a public screening and definitely earn more money on it. It makes sense. At the same time, what we learned in our panel is even if the infrastructure of private cinema rentals is going to change and indeed has already started changing, there is a role for it moving forward, maybe in a more specialized form. That's something that was spoken on by Chris Tickner, the director of marketing and special events at B&B Theatres.
But we've also been able to shift people to those Monday through Thursday dates. We've been able to shift people to those off-peak show times for some of those like retro titles, or obviously booking for, all of the new products that are coming out. We do expect that to sort of continue on, with May releases to not have as many spots available for those. But we do think that, people will still be buying for the new titles, even if it's at a higher rate, especially since a lot of our locations do have some smaller auditoriums that we can utilize for that. And we'll continue to grow, like Clint said, to getting back to our, $800, $1,500, $2,000 events when we're able to fill up our auditoriums at 100%. But we still have, 80% of our locations at B&B are recliners. So we always have, a 30 to 40 seat auditorium that we've sold thousands of these screenings to. So I think they're going to come back to watch a movie on that 35 seat theater for us. So it might be an ongoing revenue stream. They may not get, Avengers on an opening weekend, but we'll tell them, hey, you can get that 30-seat auditorium 2 weeks after. They'll be like, okay, I'll watch it opening weekend, and then I'll come back for my private rental 2 weeks after. So.
And that was Chris Tickner, the Director of Marketing and Special Events at B&B Theatres, talking about the future of private rentals for a top 10 circuit like B&B. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this concept evolves. I think, Rebecca, you mentioned it earlier, that by the time that cinemas opened here in New York City, it was so late into the pandemic that we really didn't have that many opportunities to rent a private auditorium for ourselves. A lot of the shows were already operating on a general admissions basis. I think the other factor we have to consider is this is probably something for big friend groups or for families. I personally have like 3 friends here in New York City, especially during the pandemic. I've lost touch with a lot of people. So in a city where everywhere you go, you're used to just seeing strangers, and a lot of my social life ends up being in big public places, having a big, robust group of people to go and split the price of renting an auditorium, I think that's a better fit in communities where people maybe aren't as transient here, like in New York City, where both of us, Rebecca, we moved here in our late 20s, basically, once we started our careers, as opposed to places where people are more established or have families. Or maybe I'm just a loser. Russ, what has been your experience with private rentals so far?
My experience is also, unfortunately, a little bit different than it would have been because we've been living in a city that is not the place I usually live. So none of my friend group is here. I've basically existed in a very small family unit for almost a year now, which is my wife, my infant, now toddler child, and her parents. And so, no, I haven't done a private rental because while I'm in a state where theaters were open and I could have done it, I don't really know anybody here. So it's kind of like, okay, so, 3 of the 4, someone would have to stay home with our child because we're just not going to take him to the movies right now because he's just too young. So 3 of the 4 of us could go rent a room to watch a movie, which is basically means we're going to go pay to do the thing we're just doing with the same people at home. And it's like, it just doesn't make sense for us, which is unfortunate because I would have liked to do the experience had my wife and I still been in LA where we have our friend group. Then, yeah, we would have looked into some version of this when it was an option in the LA area. I know people who did and they really liked it. Like a lot of my friends have done private rentals and I know that it was a pleasant experience for them. But unfortunately, here at the podcast, we have a collective track record of zip with this due to a variety of different circumstances.
And I gotta hope that that'll be the case for a lot of people where there's word of mouth and they see that this can happen and it is happening and they get excited about it. I mean, that's the position I'm in where, my birthday is in October and Russ, as you mentioned, the Alamo in LA has, mostly small auditoriums. The Brooklyn location too, there are some pretty small auditoriums where they typically do more, specialty niche programming. Alamo has had great success with private cinema rentals and I don't know come October what the situation will be, what the price point will be, but that's definitely something that I'm looking forward to, potentially spending a birthday weekend, renting out a movie theater, renting out an auditorium, and forcing my friends to watch whatever I want them to watch for 90 minutes. And I am going to intentionally choose the worst movie that I can find. And everyone listening to this podcast has an open invitation, October 10th. Let's get it going.
You have to give us a programming preview there. The same question goes to you, Russ. What's going to be the private rental title that you guys pick?
Oh, man. I will say that just prior to the pandemic, it wasn't my last movie experience before COVID, but one of the last movie experiences I had before COVID was a friend renting out one of the Draft House theaters in LA for his birthday. And he showed, and I've talked about this on the pod before, he showed Showgirls with a comedian's commentary.
Right.
And it was extremely entertaining. We all had a great time. I don't know what my private rental would be. I mean, I'm just going to say Dune because I think that's expected of me at this point. But, I think that everybody needs a refresher on David Lynch's version of Dune before the new one comes out. So that might be my choice would be, David Lynch's Dune.
Daniel, I'm guessing a Rocky?
Oh, no, everyone's seen Rocky. I mean, if you've watched 30 seconds of television over the last 30 years, you have caught Rocky in some way, shape, and form.
I saw the end of Rocky on TV last night. For real, no joke.
Yeah, no, it's perpetually on basic cable. I would approach the programming a little bit creatively, some things that are harder to catch. A title that I really like that I don't know if it's even available in any way, shape, and form here in the United States is one of Luis Buñuel's Mexican movies, Ensayo de un Crimen. I believe the English title is The Criminal Life of Archibald de la Cruz.
Yes.
So you've caught it, Russ.
I own it on DVD.
Oh, wonderful. I didn't even know it was available in English language.
I bought it at Kim's Video in New York a long time, probably 20, 25 years ago. And it's a double. It's that movie and then his movie Elle.
Very good as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a title that I think offers some, how could we call it? It's a madcap serial killer comedy. It's just very interesting, especially right now with a lot of the conversations, I think, in the United States would make an interesting movie to have a group of friends watch and discuss and have fun and have some interesting conversations on.
Or show his movie, The Exterminating Angel, which is about a bunch of people who go to a dinner party and discover they can't leave, which is basically what we have all done for the past year. So,
This is a true story, actually, as you mentioned that. In one of my professors in graduate school, Bob Stam, what he would do anytime he screened that in classes, he would leave the classroom and lock the door from the outside. So after you watch it, all these undergrads would watch this movie for the first time, try to get out and the door's locked. I always found that to be a nice immersive.
I know I've mentioned that movie on the podcast before, and you've probably told that story on the podcast before, but it's a good story.
It's a good one, right?
And so we're going to keep it in because I like it, and I want to take inspiration from that and do the same thing with a group of people now.
I have to say my pick would be slightly less psychologically traumatizing, hopefully. I would go with a movie that shares my birth year. It's called Gwendolyn, or The Adventures of Gwendolyn in the Land of the Yik Yak, which is based on a French comic series. But it actually, when you look at the movie, it's a straight, Indiana Jones did really well, so we're going to do a complete, rip-off of this kind of adventure archaeologist. But it stars Tawny Katane. So imagine like a gender-swapped Indiana Jones with a lot of, weird quasi-BDSM stuff built in. It's definitely a movie that I like to force friends to watch because it is exceptionally strange and weird and fun. And yeah, the more people I can force to see on the biggest screen I can manage, the better.
I saw that movie in the theater in 1984 when I was a child.
What?
Because it looked like an Indiana Jones. I mean, if you look up the poster for that movie, it is...
They're completely. But then you look at subsequent DVD Blu-ray releases. Like, it's by Just Yakin. It's by the guy who directed Emmanuel. Like,
yes.
In the subsequent cult life of the movie, they are clearly ramping up this is Indiana Jones, but it's sexy.
Yes.
Also, a guy gets his ears ripped off. Like, it's such an odd blend.
To be fair, it sounds like something I would love watching as a child.
Oh, exactly.
60 Indiana Jones when I'm 12, absolutely. How many tickets?
Yeah, I mean, the poster is a magnificent ripoff. It's like it fakes the font of the Raiders of the Lost Ark logo and the style of Drew Struzan painted style that was, used for a lot of movie posters in the early mid-'80s. The Raiders, some of the Star Wars movies, even like Romancing the Stone, I think he did, a bunch of things like that. Romancing the Stone, also basically an Indiana Jones knockoff, but a very good one.
I mean, this whole last year, for me, it's been a case of seeing a lot of older films, and I would like to cherry pick the ones I wish I'd seen on the big screen and maybe do a private cinema rental for just the cream of the crop, like Gwendolyn. Just the 10 out of 10 trash.
Well, we'll have our opportunity to do that in all our upcoming birthdays through this private rental option. Russ, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Wait, who joined who? Did I join you? Did you join me?
No, my bad. It gets confusing with this co-host setup, right? But to our audience, thanks again for listening in. This is the Box Office Podcast, produced by the Box Office Company and Record Edit Podcast. Don't forget to rate us, to review us, and we will be back next Thursday with another episode. Thanks again.